Director, the Institute of International Development Cooperation, KITEC. May I now invite Ms. Hannah Ryder as our moderator to join us on the panel and to also invite our panelists to the stage. Unfortunately, we do not have 7 microphones, and so we've put them two. So please, in the spirit of collaboration, please use those mics. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you to our panelists for joining this discussion, and thank you all again for being here for this discussion. To open it, I would like to, first of all, just make a few small points. First of all, I think one of the interesting aspects and one of the things that we wanted to bring out at this event in particular through the member showcase of the African multilateral financial institutions was just the diversity of what these institutions do, and also to make the point that in terms of increasing engagement with China on trade finance, there are institutions ready and willing on the continent to work and deliver for Africa's benefit. So I think that was a key aspect around this member showcase that we wanted to bring out through this event. You've already been introduced to our panelists, but as we go along, I will give a brief introduction to them in any case. But we're very pleased to have all of them join us, and in particular to explore this question of, now that we've had all of the announcements from FOCAC 9, what next? What does it mean? What can African institutions, Chinese institutions, how do we actually strategically and also practically partner together? And what might be the challenges that we need to overcome in order to do that? So I have a really esteemed panel with me to explore these questions, and we'll also have a bit of time afterwards for some Q&A from this wonderful audience, wonderful and diverse audience. So I hope you also get some of your questions ready for that. But I'm going to use my role as a moderator of this session to kick off the discussion. And I'm going to start with you, Madam CEO Nados Bekele-Thomas, around on this question around engagement of the private sector in particular. We already have over 40 billion of foreign direct investment stocks from China on the African continent. And we've had this new commitment saying we're going to get another 10, there's going to be another 10 billion coming over the next 3 years, sorry. And that's backed up, as I mentioned earlier in my presentation, by this 100 billion of stocks commitment by 2035. What's your view on, what are the milestones what are the opportunities and challenges that presents, and what milestones should we be looking out for as African countries try to attract this foreign direct investment, and what role do you see the African multilateral financial institutions playing in that?
Thank you very much. I think, like the commissioner had said, Africa is now organized than what it was before. Africa has got its own blueprint. Africa has got its own implementation plan. Africa has, already started putting in place some of the missing institutions in terms of especially the financial institutions, like the African Financial Monetary Fund, the African Central Bank, and many others. We have the AFCFTA, which is there, and it's making progress together with our its really sister organization, I should say, the Afreximbank that is behind the AFCFTA. There are so many things that have already happened. In the last 2 days, I was having also parallel meetings with the institutions here. I had a meeting with AAI,
Asian Infrastructure
yes,
Investment Bank.
and then the
Yes.
African Multilateral CDF or whatever.
Yes,
But there are many
MCDF, yeah.
institutions that are there, and also the private sector. What we have said, especially engagement with the private sector, is that one, from our side, there are certain things that we need to do. And, one of the things is really the conducive environment, the legal regulatory frameworks that are really impeding, private investors to come. But also, most importantly, from the Chinese side also, they said that there is the perception, there is the trust issue, and therefore there is a need for us to work together to make sure that these problems are smoothened. But most importantly, on the financial sector, we've seen also the alliance that the financial institutions are making, the Association of the Financial Institutions in Africa, but also the multilateral financial institutions. They are there to really together look at the regulatory framework, harmonize them, make sure that, the missing links are established. They're the force towards the reform of the financial sector in Africa. And we rely on them because individually they cannot make this a very big impact. But together they make an impact in terms of reforming the financial sector together with the African Union. But also this is a big force towards also the reform of the global multilateral organizations. Why? Because in Africa, for Africa, the narratives are so bad, okay? And these narratives are driven from data. And data collection and data analysis in our continent needs to be improved. We have to have our data clear and available to others. Two is like the commissioner said, is that the credit rating agencies are biased. And this I can tell you because in 2004, when the credit rating agencies rated Kenya so badly, we instituted as a UN, I was with the UN, another parallel mechanism of doing the same assessment. And then we were able to influence the credit rating, the international credit rating, to make sure that, they adjust their figures. So data collection is very critical. We need to do something about that. And we need the Chinese support in that because that's an infrastructure needed. And the digital infrastructure would help because that's one thing that they have announced. So we have to choose critical priority areas where all these goodwill action, the 10 action points would go to. For us, we need to really focus on things that have fundamental and foundational programs and projects that make a difference, which have got catalytic, catalytic effect, on the whole partnership that we deal with China. So the credit rating is another agency that we want to put in place. And what we have to do is, Commissioner always says, Africa does it, but, Africa does it with the partnership of strategic partners, in partnership with these strategic partners, so that, we are also informed of the experiences of other countries. He said so. The Chinese credit rating agency could support us, inform us, to let us understand what were the problems, what were the success stories, so that we can live forward. Okay, so this collaboration and cooperation in all what we are doing is very critical and very important than the financial donations that we give. Truly. Why? Because China has come out to be an exemplary country. They've gone, we were the same, and they're now where they are with with how many billions of people. So Africa can learn a lot from China, but there should be trust and confidence and we need to move together in many aspects,
Yeah.
in many aspects. Second thing that I would like to say is that all the action points, be it agriculture, be it industrialization, value addition, SMEs, and all this are already contained within our second 10-year implementation plan. So we have one plan that can guide us. Let's work together. And finally, infrastructure. Our PIDA program is there. Yes, certainly there are national interests, but also we have to really put the continent-wide interest, the PIDA programs there, and ask for support. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Madam CEO. I got from you, we have to prioritize. We also have to harmonize more and also think beyond just finance. It's also around and I think, again, many of our multilateral financial institutions are trying to do just that. So let's keep on exploring that. Let me put a similar question to you, Mr. Qi Shuwei. With the China-Africa Business Council, you're vice chairman of the China-Africa Business Council, and it has around, I think now over 3,000 Chinese companies as members, companies who are interested and already investing on the continent. So some of those existing 40 billion stocks are from CABC members. And I'm hoping, I guess, the new 10 billion will also be some CABC members. What would you say are the key next steps that are needed from both the Chinese and African side in order for the 10 billion of foreign direct investment to really be realized in Africa over the next 3 years, in your experience?
For the question that is raised by the MC, actually, our council serves our member companies that has the willingness to invest in Africa. We provide our guidance and support. Our council actually introduces the financial institutions to provide their financial services and also assistance to companies that decided to invest in Africa. There are, of course, flagship projects with the support of government and also the assistance of our council, CFBC, as well as the positive attitude of financial institutions like banks from China are being implemented in Africa. And also in this process, there are foreign banks engaging in this process, helping Chinese companies go into Africa, like banks from Africa, providing a portfolio of or diverse services. And the next point, for companies from China that are engaging in African development, we help them select good projects to invest so that they can ensure success for their investment. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Qi Shuwei. Again, there's obviously a lot of work that is already in place to continue for foreign direct investment and Chinese companies to go to Africa. We'll explore a little bit later as to what even further can be done. Mr. Moore, let me bring this question to you as well. In terms of the immediate follow-up, what would your recommendations be, having seen some of these announcements? What would your recommendations be to the African multilateral financial institutions and also some of the countries? What would be the way to leverage the private sector?
Thank you. It's a pleasure being here. I think to Dr. Ilomi's point, on this question, we are pushing against an unlocked door. There is already willingness on the part of China to make these extensions. And I wanted to start by acknowledging that over the last 25 years, when it comes to appetite for African risk, the Chinese have been very, very open to that. We know that generally there is a perception of risk in Africa that sometimes is outsized, is larger than the actual reality. And that risk, whether real or imagined, has made it difficult for other places to invest and put significant capital at risk in Africa or deploy capital in Africa. And so we've seen significant deployment of capital from the Chinese and say, like I said, comfort with what is perceived as risk in Africa. So I think it's important for us to acknowledge that. Now, what we're looking for, of course, is more. Last year, 2.6 billion of total Chinese commitment in financing to Africa went to national and regional lenders. So there's already a path here where China is beginning to go in this direction. For me, I think my recommendation will be on the African side. If you are inviting guests to your house, you clean up your house, you prepare your house because you know you're going to be hosting guests. Yeah. And so if we want more capital, and it doesn't have to simply be Chinese capital, but capital in general, there are things that we need to do. And I would like to use an illustration for that. So I'm here in Beijing at Schwarzman College, Tsinghua University. I'm the Boeing chair for international affairs. And yesterday, my TA and I, we got the list of all of the students who applied, who registered to take my course. And there's a large number of students. And so I was talking to some of the students and asking like, oh, why did you sign up for this course? And it turns out that a good number of the students spoke to the students from last year. And the students from last year told them, you should take Professor Moore's course. The point I'm trying to make with this is that one of the best advertising has to be word of mouth. Someone recommends you. So the success of Chinese firms in Africa would only encourage other Chinese firms to come. And so, the China Africa Business Council has, say, over 3,000 members. Mm. Most times, bad things tend to get more publicity than good things. There are 3,000 members of the China Africa Business Council, but today, one of the biggest stories in Africa, of course, is the SEZ in Nigeria, a Chinese-run SEZ in Nigeria that won an action against the Nigerian government in arbitration. Now, if I'm a Chinese investor and I don't know anything at all about Africa and I'm trying to look up information about Africa, some of that stuff is going to come up. So to the CEO of NEPAD's point, the quality of the regulatory and legal environment is going to be really important if we want external capital. And to this point, I would say that in any economy, we're talking about this intricate dance between supply and demand. And in Africa, what we need is a demand of better quality governance in terms of the legal and regulatory framework. And that's where AAMFI can come in, right? Because they're going around the world trying to raise capital. They can be a good constituency for their shareholder members, the governments, about especially the business environment, improving the quality of the environment, the sanctity of contracts. Those are the kinds of things that when they're in play, I think it's much easier for us to get more and more capital. So I'll go back to my original point by saying in Africa, encouraging Chinese financing, especially when it comes to investment, we are pushing against an open door. There is already willingness on the part of the Chinese.
Thank you. So I think that message has actually come through quite a lot in terms of that willingness, but also the cleaning up and preparing, harmonizing again, but also, yes, getting ready, being ready, and using the African multilateral institutions for that. We've had a bit of talk about credit rating agencies and risk. Madam Zhang Tingting, you are the executive director of one of China's foremost credit rating agencies, and I understand you do rate some of our economies and also some of our institutions. What's your view in terms of the potential for new private sector finance and cooperation between China and Africa, and what role can rating agencies play in that?
Thank you for having me. So CCXI is actually the first and the largest local credit rating agency. So we have been in this market for over 32 years. And talking about the topic, related to the question, actually, I'd like to promote Pandabond, actually, because I think the MDB, especially the MDBs from Africa, have a very good opportunity of, making use of this market to get affordable financing. So I would like to take this chance to introduce a little bit on the Panda bond market, the recent development. The Panda bond is actually the bond, RMB bond issued by overseas issuer in domestic Chinese bond market. And this market actually started quite early in 2005, but it only got momentum since 2015. And up until now, there has been a total issuance of 900 billion RMB in China. And especially, since the second half of 2022, due to the, the China-US interest rate spread, actually this market has started to accelerate. So I think, especially when we are seeing the first half of this year, the total issuance has already been 110 billion, which is 50% increase compared with last year. And the 2023 is already, 80% increase compared with the previous year. So when we're talking about, the reason that promotes this market, I think there can be attributed to three reasons. The first is definitely, the China-US interest rate spread, which can be as large as 200 BP. And secondly, I think is the policy that supports free use of the proceeds from the Panda bond. So currently, the proceeds can be, invested in China and also, taken out of China. So that is also, a policy stimulus for this market. And the third one, but also the very important one, we are seeing that the importance of RMB in the global currency system is increasing. So that will, be a important drive for the Panda bond market in the future. So we do have a very positive outlook on this market. We do see that this market will continue to expand. And when we are talking about, the issuers of this market, actually, we are seeing more overseas issuer coming to this market. Even along the first half of this year, there has been 10% increase compared with last year for the overseas issuer to tap this market. And also, even though, the European issuers and the Asian issuers used to dominate for the Panda bond market, but we are very positive. We are very happy to see, I think, from the diversified overseas issuer from the emerging markets. So whether from the South Latin America or Middle East or even from Africa to enter this market, I think, in the very near future. And the other thing is that when we are talking about the industry player, actually MDB has been a very active industry player in the Panda bond market, and the total proportion of the MDB in this market has been, I think, around 10%. And for example, the New Development Bank has been a very active local issuer in Panda bond, and yes, they make very good use of this market to finance. So talking about back to the point of what we're discussing today, actually, I think there are several reasons that the Panda bond market have a very good opportunity, for African issuers to tap. First is actually the most important is still the financing cost advantage, because we're, as I have said, that we're forecasting that this kind of interest rate spread will continue in a period of time. And for example, I like to mention, for the New Development Bank, the latest issuance for 3 years for 8 billion RMB. So the cost is only 2%, 2.3%. So I think this is very beneficial in terms of the cost. And secondly, I think for compared with the African corporates, definitely the African MDBs can enjoy a much higher credit rating. So that will, allows the African MDBs to better explore this market. And thirdly, through the way of the guarantee structure, actually the African corporates and the entities can also tap this market with guarantee structure from the MDBs, because we have seen, last year, the sovereign of Egypt has successfully issued their pen bond with the guarantee from the African Development Banks and the AIIB. Last but not least, from the speech from Mr. Xi, several days ago, he especially supports and encourages the African issuers to, tap this market and make use of the pen bond market. And I think that will give a very huge, policy incentive to the African issuers when they're tapping this market, because this market is somehow, policy is very important. The support from the government is very important, to help the African issuers to tap this market. So this is, what I have to say on this point.
Thank you so much. And I think as you're talking about the different rates of interest, for instance, but also the fact that because so much economic engagement is happening between China and Africa, especially in RMB, then that also creates an opportunity in itself, which leads me to TD, the Africa Trade and Development Insurance. Mr. Tanyi, your organization is involved in a lot of trade and development insurance. What would you say are the opportunities that you see from the announcements made, and the expectation really of continuing growing trade between Africa and China? Where do you think that your organization will place yourself in this?
Thank you very much for having us. Like you rightly said, we all observed a number of very strong commitments that were made on Thursday by the Chinese president. In fact, for us, I think we count a number of milestones that were actually made in that speech. First, the announcement of the zero tariff. It's something which I would say is the first time a developing country and actually an economy is opening up to Africa at 100% of all tariff compiled. That's the first time. It's a very, very strong milestone. And in fact, some of the commitments, especially the 50 billion of 360 RMB that would come, we as a TD actually see it as a very, very good opportunity, because the fact is, the president said in his statement that this is going to be an opportunity for Africa to tap into the big Chinese market, right? And we see it also on the opposite side, where we think it's a very good opportunity for the Chinese side to tap on a 1.4 billion market of Africa. And that's actually where we come in attracting that investments and trade into the continent. I mean, since our inception, for example, some 24 years ago, we've been able to, with the kind of de-risking tools which we have, attract business and transactions over 80 billion in the continent. And these are the kind of things which a lot of people don't know. And it's our role to de-risk the continent. And I mean, with this kind of opportunities that have been announced, we see our role in attracting a lot of Chinese investments into the continent so that it becomes a two-way street. I mean, there's always opportunity in the continent, and we do have a 1.4 billion market, which I think with all the policies which are going to be put in place and our de-risking tools, this would be a very good opportunity for Chinese investors to come into the African market. And that's where we come in as a TD.
Great. So also a very upbeat assessment of the next few years, based in particular on the size of the two markets and the potential for more trade. Madame Wang Luo, we had several references also in the different documents that came out for FOCAC and also the speech to the African Continental Free Trade Area. Obviously, a scheme flagship project that Chinese government and Chinese firms are keeping an eye on and also taking advantage. We know we heard recently from the FCFTA Secretariat that one of the first firms to take advantage of the AFCFTA rules was a Chinese firm based in Ghana. But this idea of one common market with Africa, how important do you think that is? And what do you think African multilateral financial institutions should do to take advantage of this new openness in terms of trade?
Thank you very much, Ms. Ryder, for inviting me. So I come from KaiTech, which is a think tank affiliated with the MOFCOM of China. So I am a policy researcher from the Chinese perspective, and I've been following the relationship between China and Africa in terms of trade and economic cooperation. So regarding your question, we have been keeping a close eye on the outcome of FOCAC 9 and some relevant measures and announcements, specifically focusing on promoting industrialization of Africa and also improving the localized productivity of Africa. We can see very strong consensus and willingness on both sides. And we have also announced some ambitious investment plans. Particularly, you mentioned that China will support the building of the FTA on Africa. So, as I understand it, this FTA is very important for both Africa and China, because for such a unified market, it's very important for attracting Chinese investment and investment from other countries. This is the key element.
On the one hand, if you look at a single African continent, the market size, volume is not sufficient to attract Chinese companies. But if a common market that we are considering that is thriving, that it would be more attracting to the Chinese companies for both medium and long term. So on African FTA and its link to China, I do believe there are some fundamental work that needs to be done. First of all, like Madam Thompson have said, data, the fundamental structure for financing institution taxation, design, and also other foundational work. For both China and Africa, we need to further take that into consideration, further improvement. I do align myself with Mr. Moore that if you wish to attract Chinese investors and other foreign investors, in terms of institutions for Africa, if we can improve institutions and have more incentive policies, that would be more beneficial for its future. That reminds me of China when we acceded to WTO. Actually, we have introduced a lot of policy changes and also amendments. We changed almost 20,000 documents domestically. That is a huge project, a painful process, because we have to balance our domestic economic development with these policy changes that adapt to the world. But our 20 years of experience showed that without such determination and the pains that we undertake, that we would not embrace a promising 20 years of development. And in this process of international division of labor, I do believe this experience is of a reference value for Africa, including Chinese determination in policy changes, our willingness, our implementation, and our alignment to the international practices. So this is also a work that is valuable for a single country in Africa as well as the whole continent. We should review our policies to see if that is favorable or promising for the external world. Maybe some ground laying or ground shaking practices shall be done. I do believe the Chinese government has pledged its commitment and support for this regard. Not only assisting Africa, actually China, in terms of the FDA, we also encourage Chinese companies to invest in Africa. There's also a lot of work needs to be done. Our institutions, our current plans and policies, are they providing equal treatment? Our financing, assisting Chinese companies in Africa and guarantee mechanism, are they favorable for Chinese investors? We should also have a deep dive into the current structure. So today, the theme is building bridges. I do believe this is quite relevant for today as a sideline event of the FOCAC. I do believe that we need to build bridges between Chinese and African businesses, Chinese and African governments, and also between the private sector and public sector. Government has their work to be done. Private sector has their own business to cater to. We do believe that the government should provide public goods and support that are both conducive for Chinese companies as well as companies that are based in other countries. Development Reimagined has done a lot as you have led the team, but more work is awaiting. So basically, that's briefly what I want to share. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think your point in terms of the determination on China's side 20 years ago, just over 20 years ago, to adapt and really, we mentioned it earlier, cleaning up and preparing on so many different levels, I think, as you say, is a very important lesson and something that can be taken forward. But also, I think your point about exchanging between African and Chinese institutions. And I want to come back to Zhang Qingting on that one in terms of the exchange between African and Chinese institutions, for example, on better understanding of panda bond markets or building domestic markets, but also how to build those sorts of markets domestically. What's your view in terms of how to reduce risk, in particular for better ratings, for example?
Thank you for your question. Actually, credit rating can be a bridge both on the issuers and investors, but it also can be a bridge. For example, for us as a local credit rating agency, it can be a bridge for foreign issuers and the domestic investors. And so we do consider us to provide to play such kind of important role between it. So I would like to touch a little bit on our sovereign rating system, because I think sovereign rating is somehow the basement for our credit assessment on overseas issue. Yeah, and the current sovereign rating system globally is pretty much dominated by big three. I can see. Even there has been a lot of criticize over them, but I think they're sort of, a reflection of the current, world order, which is dominated by the dollar. Yeah. But, when coming to the Chinese domestic market, definitely, we have our own sovereign rating system and a philosophy, which is different from the big three. And I think, each local rating agencies, one day we can also become, international rating agency. We can also have our own philosophy on sovereigns, because I think we are standing at a crossroads of a new world entering an old world entering a new world, and a lot of things is happening on this market. So, when we are, talking about the sovereign rating, our current outlook on the African continent, actually, we all know that the African continent is suffering from, the same factor that has been affecting the global market along these years. Since 2020, there has been COVID, there has been the conflict of the Russian Ukraine and, in the Middle East. and also the tightening of the global financial market. So due to this, I think there has been a dilemma of, a high inflation, a lower growth, and a higher debt. So I think many African countries is now suffering from this kind of facts. So we are witnessing a slower economic growth, in 2023 compared with 2022 for most, African countries. And also even the debt is pretty much stabilized at the current time, but we're witnessing, more, sovereigns that is in the distress of the solvency in Africa. But I think, despite these factors, we are still seeing resilience in the African continent, and especially with the external factor that started to fade, the factors I have listed before. So I think the credit outlook on the African continent is on the positive side from our perspective. And also if we take the view from the African Development Bank for their latest forecast, I think the 2024, even 2025, we are likely to see a more positive, GDP growth. Yeah, and also if we're looking, longer, we're seeing a lot of potential in the African continent, for example, for the huge human resources, natural resources, and also the transformation of the technologies, the industries, and also the digitalization. This can all, shape the economy and make the economy more diversified, which will give, the future potential for the economic growth. And also, for the infrastructure construction, it definitely will provide, more incentives for the longer term, economic growth, and as well as the overall credit performance of this market. So I do think that as a Chinese credit rating agency or from an emerging market, we do have to, have our own alternative sort of risk on sovereigns. And, currently we do not have, enough coverage on the sovereigns of African, but we would like to increase more, we would like to develop, cover more, and, we would like to move ahead with the Chinese enterprises. Instead, try to, help them when they're exploring this market. We are also trying to help them to get a risk perspective from us.
Yeah,
Thank you.
That's great. Thank you. And I think you're alluding also the perspective on risk that you're alluding to, I think also relates to a point that Mr. Moore mentioned earlier around the general, I think, perspective from Chinese private sector of going into the African continent has been really quite, I guess, entrepreneurial in a sense, and less risk averse than many other foreign investors. And I think that speaks for itself in what you were saying. Let me come back to you, Madam Nados Bekele-Thomas. In terms of, you talked, I think, actually, Madam Wang Lo, you talked about industrialization. And again, I want to come back to that point about industrialization and infrastructure. And what role do you feel? Certainly, I know a lot of African multilateral financial institutions talk about how much their focus is, and we've seen in the members showcase how much their focus is on productive investment and on infrastructure as well, and financing that. What's your view in terms of how can African financial institutions place themselves in a way to really take advantage, in a sense, of that different perhaps risk perception and the willingness from China?
Well, there are two factors: the soft factor, which is a perception issue, which seems to be easy, but not easy at all. It needs investment, and we need to do a lot. And that's what the Prof alluded to that. And we need to really work on that. But the most important aspect is the fundamentals should be put in place. These fundamentals are, like I said, from data collection, data analysis, where we need to improve, to digitalize our systems and to make it more conducive to private investors, so that, information is available to them. And whenever investment comes, it's based on actual, real information, and not based on what they see from documents, it's very interesting for Africa that the World Bank document will be contradicting what the UN document would say, and it will contradict to what the national documents would say, and it will contradict because there is no really reliable data. One of the things that I really think we need to invest in, which is fundamental, is data. The second thing is infrastructure. In infrastructure, we always talk about investments flowing for construction purposes, but unless there is the preparation work that is done properly, then, and have bankable projects with concrete evidence of, the merits of the infrastructure, then investors will not come in. And this preparation work is very important. We have got for AAAMFI, which is responsible for that preparation work from conception to bankability and investability. We have, we work with ADB through the IPPF. Resources come to IPPF and they give us those resources to develop the preparatory work. We have got an expert pool. This expert pool was made up of, only African experts. We have expanded that. We have expanded that to become international expert pool. And therefore, we have got the Germans there, the Japanese there, and I've been inviting the Chinese to join us so that we have really pipeline projects that are there to be presented to the investors, to the private sector. Without that, there won't be any proper investment. And that's where actually China has been failing because, in the programs, they were not provided with viable information and data. And therefore, it's very critical and very important that we build that. And in my discussions with the private sector, that's where we were focusing on. And it's very important also to note that, from the discussion here, China also can help in de-risking, in guaranteeing, for those investors that want to come to Africa. And that is very critical and very important. On, on the various aspects of the conducive environment, that's why you have the African Union Commission. We work with the government member states, and, we would make sure that the environment in Africa is conducive enough for Chinese investors to come.
Yeah.
So,
great.
So I guess,
No, thank you. The bankability, I think the building the pipelines, as you were saying, if bankable projects, it's something that the African multilateral financial institutions do. And also, as you were saying, in terms of de-risking and guarantee, we have agencies that do guarantee. And so Chinese support for those organizations, as well as de-risking and working to guarantee themselves, is definitely an area for partnership. Thank you. I feel like I have held the mic too much in terms of asking questions, and I know there are questions already online. But there may be some questions also from the audience here. Yes, we have one at the back there. I'm going to take a bunch of 3 and then put them to our panelists to be able to, if you would like to respond to those questions, please feel free, unless the questions are specifically directed at you. Oh, Senna. And then we'll see how we go in terms of the bunches. I've got 3 online questions already, so let's do the ones in the audience, and then come back to the panelists. I will ask brief questions only, please.
Thank you. I am Ali from the University of UIB. First, I would love to start with saying that nothing else in the world, not all the armies, is so powerful as an idea whose time has come. So reforming the international financial architecture is actually that time has come, and AAMFI is a very good initiative in that direction. So basically, my question is for Mr. Kenneth Tanier about the de-risking tools. What are the major challenges and how and what can be done in order to overcome these challenges for the de-risking tools to be effective? Thank you.
Okay, international financial architecture reform, and specifically what can be done on that for de-risking for Africa. Thank you.
Hello, thank you, moderator, Ms. Anna. I'm Kevin from the African Climate Foundation. This year we can see from the President Xi's speech and the Beijing Declaration and Action Plan, there are 10 action partnerships. There's one for green development. So my question is whether, to the panel, whether your organization is looking into or will look into the green sector, especially for clean energy, and also green industrialization, climate mitigation, adaptation, and resilience. And the second small question, because next year, South Africa will host G20. And the focus will be energy and finance. So I'm wondering whether, from your perspective, how sustainable finance can unlock new opportunities for the continent. Thank you.
Thank you. Great question.
Oh, sure. Hi, my name is Jefferson. I'm from Lafayette, Nigeria. Thank you, panelists and Hannah, for the great panel. My question is around the common market that was sort of mentioned, right? And I think, I think that to me, it seems almost a bit problematic, right? Because we're almost conceiving, the continent, disparate from, Algeria to South Africa to Nigeria to Kenya as one sort of entity. And I know that it's useful for a sort of branding exercise, right? To think of, this is how China can interact with the African continent. But in practice, how do we make sure that, like if we think about a common market, something like the EU, as sort of a almost benchmark, what can, various countries in Africa do to conceive of like trade both within the continent and outside as this big common market?
Okay, how is the common market becoming a reality? Okay, we have three excellent questions. Who would be in? Can I put first this question to you? Or any of the questions, in fact, please.
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. And in fact, we do agree that the challenges in the international financial reforms are quite daunting. This is based on an architecture that has been since the existence of the First and Second World War, the IMF and World Bank institutions, which over the years, with especially the developing countries, have kind of found that these are not really very adapted to their own context and situation. And it's in those different challenges that we as African financial institutions, basically the alliance of African developmental financial institutions, AAMFI, we were able to sit around this, given that most of these challenges are cross-cutting. And they touch on very fundamental aspects, sometimes on the existence and ecosystem of the whole financial architecture for Africa. And that's why TD, TDB, Afrexim Bank, and all these financial institutions which are part of the Africa Club were able to create themselves, associate themselves, so we can face some of these challenges, not individually, but as one. And it's not a very easy thing because they touch on various aspects, from political to economic or even legal issues. And that's why as a solution to some of this, we are working very in straight collaboration with the African Union, with our member states and the AAMFI Secretariat to address some of these issues, which have always been considered as sometimes not on equal footing. And we think the moment is quite opportune where we should bring all our cards to the table and look at ourselves as equal partners. And that is where we created this initiative that was launched early this year so that we can be able to address some of these issues. Thank you.
Okay, I know, Bekleton, you'd like to speak on the green energy question.
Thank you very much. I think that is a brilliant question that you asked, because that is the future. We have developed what we call the Continental Power Master Plan, for Africa. The CPMP, in abbreviation, really looks at what Africa needs to really transform itself and to realize the Agenda 2063. And certainly, we need 1,200 gigawatts, in terms of energy to help Africa transform. Right now, currently, we have got only 237 gigawatts, all in all, in Africa. And the 1,200, that we need, would come mostly from the green energy, renewable energy. And the CPMP has outlined the areas of, and in a very well-studied manner, they have identified areas where green energies will be installed if Africa wants to really be transformed. And this takes into consideration from generation to transmission to distribution. It's the whole system-wide approach. And, the 237 be as it is, for the additional ones, 67% of it should come from renewable energy. And that's where we would require investors. And what we are calling for now is we have got this master plan, but this master plan is not bankable. So we need to really come out with bankable programs. And that's why we're calling for support from China and from all investors, so that we can do the preparatory work for pipeline projects towards the realization of the CPMP and towards coming to the green energy. And China is very critical and very important, because the investment that China has made in green energy is the first in the world, right? And there are technologies that we can borrow, and there is so much technical assistance that we can get from China to realize our dreams. Is very important. The third one is the whole bond, the green bond. We need to move into the green bond to mobilize resources. And in order to do that, domestically, we need also to develop our capital markets, which are not there, literally. There are very few. But the African capital market that the commissioner talked about would help. But countries should also develop their own capital markets so that they can support resources would flow to the rural areas, because it's not just only in the cities that we develop the green energy. It's there at the level of the rural communities. And lastly, what we want from China is not only the technology, but associated value additions and the intellectual capacity building aspect of it. So that is very critical for us. So I'll stop here. When it comes to climate adaptation, we're developing 2-3 centers for climate adaptation, centers of excellence, where we would build knowledge and disseminate knowledge so that, adaptation becomes a day-to-day norm and function for African transformation in that area. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. I know, Wang Luo, you'd like to speak on the trade point, perhaps?
So I'd like to try to answer the third question about the integration of the common market of Africa and benchmarking against the EU. So I can see that the establishment of AAMFI has reminded me of a question. That is, there is so much solidarity in Africa, so it has established the AU and also AAMFI and also AMA. That is the African medical regulator. So this reminds me of Asia. Indeed, Asia is quite scattered around. We have Middle Asia, South Asia, East Asia, North Asia. So you can see a lot of heterogeneity in the development of Asia. Well, there is some pros to heterogeneity. That is, we can have tiered industrial transfer from, for example, from Japan and South Korea to China, and then to ASEAN, and then to Southeast Asia. However, the characteristics of our economy is that we are oriented towards the European and American market through trade processing. This is the basic and fundamental feature of Asia, but only at later stages, when we are quite developed, that China and Japan and ROK had more collaboration and connection. But the situation in Africa is different. From the very beginning, the African continent is more homogeneous because every country in Africa is basically similar to each other in their development stages. So there are both pros and cons to this situation. So I have been kept thinking the solidarity of Africa and also the strong willingness for integration of Africa, how can this be translated into actual productivity? So my personal take is that from the very beginning, we should not aim at such a high level of EU. That's a very high level of integration. But what we can do is that, for example, we can attract investment from outside Africa. We can do some solid work in this regard. For example, to integrate the FTA of Africa with the reduction of tariffs. We can think about reducing tariffs and also the reduction of non-tariff barriers. And we can even think about a certain industry and starting from this specific industry, because it will be quite difficult for us to focus on all the industries. So maybe starting from the AU, from AMA, starting from healthcare and medicine, the medical sector. For example, we can do the alignment of drug standards among different countries. So different countries need to improve their policy regulations in this regard. So I think it's better for different countries to align their standards towards a unified and integrated one.
Let's say Asia, we don't have such institutional arrangement, but for Africa, if we do have, then we can start with the access of products, and then also the format and standardization of products. Maybe we can start with a single product, and then we can copy that to other products and sectors. That might be one approach feasible for the African FTA and other regional institutions.
Thank you very much. And I think that there is already some prioritization of certain sectors within the AFCFTA. I saw Commissioner Mutango would like to come in on this point as well. Thank you, Sena.
Thank you very much, moderator. Certainly, I would like to come in so that I offer additional information. The broad framework is the African Continental Free Trade Area. 90% of the goods and services are going to be zero rated, only 10%, but gradually it's going to be 100%. But right now, the aim is 90% are going to be zero rated. And the foundations of a common market are already there. We've got a protocol on competition policy. So that way you are unifying the market. We've got a protocol on investment. We've got a protocol on intellectual property rights and a protocol on the digital economy. Then at the level of production, we are coming up with a model startup law so that the young startup operators can easily operate from one part of Africa to another part, and the countries can come up with a harmonized startup legislation across Africa so that we avoid the rest to the bottom. We have a protocol on the free movement of persons right of residence, right of establishment, so that it's much easier for any African entrepreneur to establish in any African country. Then when the process of creating the Pan-African stock exchange, which is going to be a virtual platform. And in addition to that, I already indicated we are creating the African Credit Rating Agency. Then at the level of production again, we are coming up with the development of regional and continental value chains. And a number of priority sectors have been identified: pharmaceuticals, motor vehicles, baby food, and clothing, and among others. So then ultimately, work is already underway to come up with a single currency, because the experience is that if you want to increase trade, you need a common currency. So a draft statute on the African Monetary Institute is underway. And through that, we have macroeconomic convergence criteria, which, when implemented by all the member states, then we'll be ready to have the African Central Bank and the single market. So the foundations of the common market are already in place. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Machanga, also for responding, taking the initiative to respond to that question as well in terms of the progress on regional integration. We are rapidly finishing time, so what I'm going to do is just ask the panelists just to give us, having had this discussion, quite wide-ranging discussion, give us, if there was one next step that you think both the African multilateral financial institutions and the Chinese private sector should take to take advantage of this upbeat willingness, which has been demonstrated over time. We've talked about that, but also is coming up. What would that one next step be? And just very briefly, as the wrap up based on the discussion so far. So I'm going to start with you, Mr. Tianyi.
Thank you very much, moderator. I mean, in terms of the next step, which we do see, it's to actually benefit from the announcements that have been made, because this is going to be commitment over the next 3 years, and we do have deliverables which we have to report by FOCAC 10. And just like what we did in FOCAC 9, there's actually, like what Commissioner Muchanga always says, implementation. It's just us, for example, as financial institutions, to work very in collaboration with our peers of the Chinese counterparts. For us at TD, for example, we are very close to our counterparts, which is Sino-Showa, and actually build a concrete, I would say, a platform where we can be able to encourage a lot of Chinese investors into the continent, and likewise as well. So that's for us a major step, which is about strengthening those collaborations and partnerships which we do have, so that we can be able to deliver results by the next FOCAC, and definitely tap on the resources and capacity which has been provided to us at a grateful support by the president of China. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So practically, and coming back also to a word that Commissioner Machanga used about contribution and collaborating. So identify the counterpart and work directly with them. How about yourself, CEO?
Well, on our part, because we are the implementation arm of the AU, there's so much expected in translating all these intentions and pronouncements in terms of actionable projects and programs, and seeing how they can be result-driven and come out with an outcome. So, we have intended to come back again to work with the private sector, to work with the different institutions and with the government, and really go deep down and make this to be, concrete and result-oriented, and come out with an outcome program that we will be presenting to our heads of state and government orientation committee, which is comprised of 33 heads of states and presidents. So that's our intention to do in the coming few months.
Thank you very much. Last point about next step. Back to my own business. I am a researcher in a policy concerning Africa investment and trade. So from my perspective, for the Chinese government, the next priority would be promoting trade capacity of Africa. Assistant policies design is needed. We have introduced the Panda Bond and also RMB used in Africa, but without reciprocal or balanced trade between China and Africa, that would be impossible. So I do hope the Chinese government agencies, including my think tank, where I come from, we heard that the FOCAC talking about joint research center between China and Africa. We do hope that this joint research institute will focus more on industrial cooperation, trade and investment cooperation as our main line of research, so that our partners coming from the two parties will join our efforts and resources in improving trade capacity and also the capacity of Africa to attract foreign investment. We need more detailed and systematic country, continent specific studies, and this requires joint efforts from colleagues sitting here and our institution. So this is my point. Thank you.
Okay, so as a credit rating agency, actually, I would really like to focus on the forthcoming, very possibly, the first debut of the MDB from Africa to issuance Panda Bond. So not only Panda Bond, but it can also be a green Panda Bond or sustainable ESG related Panda Bond. So I think even though the Panda Bond market is a small market, we do see that it is a symbolized market. And also, try by accessing the Panda Bond market, you are actually developing a long-term, RMB financing channel, stable RMB financing channel, because the domestic Chinese bond market is very large. So I think this will be a first step and very, very positively to see that some of the discussions has already been going there, and currently CCXI is already involved in it. So I do think that we are very hopeful to see the first debut of this green Panda Bond. But also, we are also very glad to hear that there will be an African credit rating agency. So as a Chinese credit rating agency, we would very much like to, cooperate with you if you have such kind of, willingness in exchange, maybe some our philosophy or techniques, or because we are also joining the BRICS Credit Rating Alliance sort of discussion. So I think this can be the same way we promote this kind of work. So this is what I think, for credit rating agency.
Thank you. I think we're excited about the announcement at the end of every forecast. It's big numbers announced. But I think it's important to see these numbers more as targets. 3 years ago, China committed to importing 300 billion worth from Africa. Obviously, we didn't meet that. So we can set a target, but if the constituent pieces are not in place, then there's no way to meet that target. My hope is that the multilateral financial institutions from Africa, but also African governments, will spend the next maybe 3 months having very, very detailed implementation plan and aggressively pursuing the Chinese counterparts. That way we can be able to convert these targets into actual facts on the ground. So I think that's what would be my one recommendation.
For Chinese companies going to Africa, we should encourage them to implement the important instruction from President Xi. So with our membership that exceeds 3,000, we are encouraging our members to invest and do trade in Africa. We should fully tap into their potential, including businesses and government agencies. To have cooperation with countries in Africa to build a bridge between we and you, so that we, Chinese companies and society, can have more engagement and use the capital and investment wisely. How to better utilize those capitals, how deliver better results, to play the role of a council with a big membership to fully tap into its role. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. And I think that was a really excellent way to end in terms of this before end the panel discussion. This is a panel discussion which is about building bridges. How do we do that practically? And I think what's come out are a lot of ideas, some quite practical suggestions on what next to do, working with counterparts, having national strategies, implementation strategies, etc., making those work quickly, and also in terms of actual instruments, bonds, and other types of instruments, utilizing those, trying to do that as quickly as possible. 3 years is not a long time. And as was said earlier, that these are targets. So for African countries and Chinese private sector to take advantage, we must work quickly and efficiently. So, and as well as in a determined way. So thank you very much to our panelists. Thank you all for joining us. And thank you also for the audience questions. Sorry, we didn't have much time to go back and forth with the audience, but I think we had some really excellent questions, which really brought a lot of extra depth to our discussion. Thank you all. We're going to have a group photo, and then we will have our closing remarks from others. So thank you, everybody. Let's have the group photo, and then we will invite our special guests.
I'd like to invite Dr. Elombi, Your Excellency Muchanga, Your Excellency Ambassador Osman, and Mr. Baba Gide Sudipo to the stage, please. And we thank you very much to our excellent panelists and to the amazing questions from the audience. At this point, we will now like to move into our second video segment, AAMFI Member Showcase segment. And in this series, we're going to have videos from the African Export-Import Bank, the African Trade and Investment Development Insurance, ATIDI, Africa Finance Corporation, and Africa Solidarity Fund.
What is happening with these Connection was going to ensure withdrawing the process of we want Africans to have access to work. The way it work is a free access to work. My excellent to capitalize on that success. And that is how we can have shared respect. Congratulations to the man looking forward to the next 30 years.
In March 1975, the African continent brought to the treaty, and head of state came together to realize a level of economic and financial solidarity. The African Solidarity Forum, AAMFI.
Pays naturellement le monde est une vieille institution. En Afrique, lorsqu'on parle d'âge, ça renvoie à l'excellence, ça renvoie également à l'excellence.
The mission of this Pan-African institution is to pool the resources of member states in order to finance the continent's economic development. A very clever tool for economic and social integration. Its headquarters is based in Niamey, Niger. It is managed by a multidisciplinary group of national committee member states under the direction of the leadership of Mr. Abdourahmane Diallo.
Le Parti des indépendants, dans les années 60, tout était à faire. Les idées économiques commençaient à germer. Selon mon projet, je veux contribuer au développement de mon pays, contribuer à la création d'emplois. L'idée est bonne, c'est le courant, mais je n'ai pas de ressources pour mettre en œuvre véritablement le projet et accès aux finances. Ce qui empêchait l'accès au crédit, c'était la garantie que les banques à l'époque les bailleurs de manière générale, avec une perception assez spécifique du risque tout gouvernement public. Nous avons pensé à mettre en œuvre une institution qui pouvait offrir à ces banques des mesures d'atténuation, donc des facteurs d'atténuation du risque. Ils ont créé un fonds de garantie.
Pour se rapprocher davantage des acteurs économiques des différents pays membres, le FSA a déployé en 2021 une stratégie d'ouverture de mission résidente avec l'ouverture de la première maison résidente en Nice en 2022, en janvier 2022. Et la deuxième mission résidente en Côte d'Ivoire en janvier 2023. Mais à l'horizon 2025, nous avons en perspective l'ouverture de deux autres missions résidentes. Une à Kigali, pour prendre en charge probablement toute l'Afrique de l'Est, et une autre à Libreville, pour l'Afrique centrale. The AFF, through its growing involvement and diplomatic capacity, has succeeded in mobilizing the several figures of African leadership, including the President of the African Union Commission, S.E. Musa Mahamat, the President of the African Development Bank, the Arab Bank for Economic Development of Africa State Badria, as well as several African heads of state.
Récemment, on a été appelé en tant qu'observateur au niveau de l'Afrique. Mais la finalité, c'est que son domaine de véritablement une présence spécialisée dominante.
Il est appelé à se faire connaître à travers ses États membres, certes, mais également à travers l'Afrique, parce que nous ambitionnons de voir l'ensemble des pays africains adhérer le fonds pour véritablement contribuer au développement économique du continent.
Avec ce qu'on est en train de faire dans le cadre de la mobilisation de ressources, certainement on va donner un fonds de garantie de l'Union, ça fait l'Afrique. Actuellement, on est associé à tout ce qui se fait dans le cadre du financement du développement en Afrique, que ce soit au niveau de l'Union africaine, que ce soit avec les Arabes, toutes les institutions qui portent véritablement. On va essayer de contrôler les contributions, solidifier davantage nos fonds, améliorer notre montage budgétaire, parce qu'actuellement, on est quand même monté par 1 milliard. On va essayer de l'améliorer, de sorte à ce que notre signature soit à un niveau de véritablement de crédibilité incontestable.
Thank you very much for these videos. The last video had me almost dancing with the music. But we'll now like to move into our closing remarks, and I'd like to give the floor to His Excellency Rahamtala Osman, the permanent representative of the African Union in China.
Thank you. Dear Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I have the honor to make these closing remarks for our forum today on building bridges, collaboration for growth between China and African multilateral financial institutions. Our discussions have illuminated the vast potential that lies within this collaboration, where the fusion of China resources and expertise with Africa's dynamism and opportunities can create transformative impacts across the continent.
Specifically, we know that the Alliance of African Multilateral Financial Institutions is crucial in supporting, mitigating, and delivering the kind of transformation that we want to see the African continent. Such liaison is critical for working with partners like China in reforming the financial architecture, risk assessment, and trade policies for a sustainable economic development that benefits both sides. Today's forum thus gives us a great opportunity to discuss and explore the potential financial mechanisms and channels that we can build with our Chinese partners in these years to come. On that note, I would like to first thank all participants from African multilateral financial institutions, specifically Dr. George Ilombi, the Executive Vice President, Corporate Governance and Legal Services of the African Export-Import Bank, representing the President, Professor Oke Orama, President of and Chairman of the Board of the Directors of the African Export-Import Bank, and Chair of the Alliance of African Multilateral Financial Institutions for joining us today. Under your stewardship, this forum has not only highlighted the importance of financial cooperation, but has also set the stage for tangible actions that will benefit millions of people across Africa. We are deeply appreciative of your tireless efforts to ensure that Africa's financial institutions remain at the forefront of driving positive change across the continent. I would also like to give special thanks to His Excellency Commissioner Albert Muchanga, the African Union Commissioner for Trade and Industry, and our Chinese partners from the ministries for their active participation and commitment to fostering collaboration between African and Chinese financial institutions and private sectors. In your speeches and discussions, we have explored avenues for enhancing financial cooperation, driving sustainable development, and fostering mutual prosperity. These conversations have not only underscored the importance of our partnership, but also the need for innovative approaches to address the unique challenges we face. Our deliberations today have covered the grounds that will lead us to a more robust collaboration between African financial and multilateral financial institutions and Chinese stakeholders. We have learned the following: the importance of initiatives such as the Alliance of African Multilateral Financial Institutions and the African Continental Free Trade Area, recognizing their potential to transform the economic landscape of Africa. By aligning these initiatives with the priorities of African nations, we can unlock new opportunities for investment in key sectors such as energy, transportation, agriculture, and digital technology. Secondly, moreover, our dialogue has emphasized the need for innovative financial solutions tailored to the unique context of African economies. The role of the multilateral financial institutions in providing technical expertise, capacity building, and risk mitigation is critical in this regard. We have seen how the collaboration between institutions like African Export-Import Bank, Chinese stakeholders, and others can mobilize resources more effectively and create synergies that benefit all parties involved. Thirdly, one of the key takeaways from our discussion is the mutual commitment to sustainability and inclusive growth. It is clear that our partnership must prioritize projects that not only drive economic growth, but also enhance social well-being and environmental stewardship. By focusing on green financing, renewable energy projects, and infrastructure that connects and empowers communities, we can ensure that our collaboration leads to long-term equitable development.
As we move forward, the success of our endeavors will depend on the continuity of this dialogue, the strengthening of our institutional ties, and the implementation of the strategies we have discussed. As such, we look forward to the closer collaboration between the institutions within the African multilateral financial institutions with Chinese stakeholders, and I urge all stakeholders to remain engaged, proactive, and focused on the shared goals that have brought us together. In closing, I would like to express my deepest appreciation to all the participants for their active engagement and to the organizer Development Reimagined for their dedication in making this forum a success. Let us now translate our discussions into actionable steps that will propel Africa and China towards a future of shared prosperity. Thank you, and I look forward to the continued growth and success of our partnership.
I would now like to invite Mr. Babajide Sodipo, Acting Executive Secretary of AAMFI, to also share his closing remarks.
Yeah, thank you very much, everybody. My task here this morning is very simple. All the very important speeches have been made. All the clever discussions have been done. All the important questions have been asked and answers have hopefully been given. So I'm simply here to thank everybody for all their support and contribution towards the success of this program. We'll certainly like to thank the African Union Commission. We'd like to thank the Commissioner Muchanga especially, as well as Ambassador Osman. AAMFI will not exist without the African Union, and we are really, really grateful for the unyielding and unstinting support that Commissioner Muchanga and his team and the rest of Addis Ababa have every step of the way offered towards AAMFI. We'll certainly like to thank our guests that came for the session. The CEO NEPAD, she has a long trip ahead of her today, but she still came. Our Chinese guests who responded to our invitation, and we've been able to have very, very important discussions to them. We'll certainly like to thank the participants that have come. Some of you braved the rain and the Beijing traffic early this morning to make it here on time. We do not take for granted that you sacrificed your Saturday morning for us, and we are most certainly grateful for that. We're grateful. We'd like to thank all the online participants who took their time to join online, particularly the participants from Africa who I'm sure would have had to wake up extremely early, or maybe some of them didn't sleep at all, being a Friday nights and all that, but who have certainly joined this program and made it a success. As I have the last words in this meeting, I think you can be sure that AAMFI will continue to work with the African Union to engage with the Chinese government to ensure that we bring FOCAC to life. We consider ourselves as implementing partners of FOCAC, and we're already taking key steps to really get the outcomes that have been brought up, to implementation. In fact, one of our members, I'm sure, will be making a very big announcement soon about the Panda bond, which is currently under development, and you only see more of that. As I close this session, it is our first session in China, but you can be sure that it will not be our last. You will continue to see more of us and hear more of us, as well as we also hope to continue to engage with you. Thank you very much, and thanks for coming.
Thank you very much, Mr. Babajide Sodipo. And with that, I would like to officially close our event for today, Building Bridges, Collaboration for Growth between China and African Multilateral Financial Institutions. My name is Sena Vonkojovi, and it has been a pleasure for me to serve as your MC today. Following this, we'll be having lunch next doors, and I'm wishing you all a very delicious and enjoyable lunch. 谢谢。